There's something to be said about independence, being able to wake up in your own bed and live in your own home. Living on your own means everything, even if it requires getting a little help. Each month, over 500,000 people statewide are able to get that help and retain their independence, thanks to in-home supportive services providers like you. Hi. Welcome to the In-Home Supportive Services, or IHSS Provider Orientation. You are about to become part of a very special group of people. Currently, there are over 500,000 individuals in California who have already enrolled as IHSS providers to help people to continue to live safely in their own homes. Most people, including those who are elderly or disabled, prefer to live in their own home. A person's home is where they feel most comfortable and where they can remain a part of their community and make decisions which affect their quality of life. The benefit that living in one's own home brings is a sense of independence, comfort, and peace that comes from familiar surroundings. You, the IHSS provider, are critical in making it possible for IHSS recipients to remain safely in their own homes, where they can enjoy their personal freedom and independence and continue being a part of their community. Without IHSS providers like you, this would not be possible. During this video, I'll be giving you some basic information about the IHSS program, and we'll also try to give you a better understanding of the program's rules, which will guide you as a provider. We'll be referring to you, the person providing the services, as the provider, and the person receiving the help as either the consumer, recipient, or more frequently, the employer. This individual is considered the employer as he or she has the authority and responsibility to hire the provider, supervise their work, define how tasks will be completed, and can also terminate the provider if he or she chooses to. So let's start things off by talking a little bit about the IHSS program and what you'll be doing. The In-Home Supportive Services program provides services to income-eligible people over the age of 65 and the blind and/or disabled. The goal of the IHSS program is to allow people to live safely in their own homes and avoid the need for out-of-home care. IHSS allows the recipient to hire someone to help out with services such as housework, laundry, meal preparation, and personal care. Personal care may include bathing and dressing services. In addition, paramedical services, such as wound care, are also available as part of the IHSS program. In order to qualify for IHSS, services almost always need to be provided in the recipient's own home. This could be in a house, apartment, hotel, or the home of a relative. The recipient can choose to live in any type of home they desire, as long as it is not an acute care hospital, skilled nursing, intermediate care, community care, or a licensed board and care facility. There are times when some services can be provided outside of the home, such as when you accompany the recipient to the doctor. There may be times when services may also be provided in the workplace, or when the recipient travels on vacation and you accompany them. You should always make sure that your employer recipient has informed their social worker in advance to verify if your circumstances will qualify for IHSS payment. IHSS is a Medi-Cal program and is funded by federal, state, and county dollars. Therefore, recipients must meet all Medi-Cal income eligibility requirements to receive IHSS services. So that's a little bit about the program. Now, let's talk about you and the requirements for IHSS providers. One of the first things you have to do is attend a provider orientation to get specific information about IHSS rules and regulations, including overtime, travel time, and IHSS program integrity. The good news is that watching this DVD is part of your orientation, so you're already well on your way. Once we're done with the orientation session, you'll be asked to sign the IHSS Provider Enrollment Agreement Form, SOC 846. By signing this form, you agree that you will provide only the authorized services. You understand the work week, overtime, travel limitations, and violations. You understand the program's expectations as described in today's orientation. You will cooperate with the state and county staff to provide necessary information. You are aware of measures that the state and county may take to enforce program integrity. You understand that if you do not follow the rules and requirements to be a provider, you may be ineligible to provide services in the IHSS program. And the information you are giving is correct under penalty of lying under oath. As part of the enrollment process, you'll also need to set up a time to get fingerprinted so that a criminal background check can be done. Even if you've previously had your fingerprints taken for something other than IHSS, such as school or a prior job, you'll still need to do it again to become an IHSS provider. Also, if you stop working for IHSS for a year or more, you will need to have your fingerprints redone. If you provide services for multiple recipients in the same county, you'll only need to be fingerprinted once. State law mandates that you are responsible for paying all costs related to the fingerprinting and your background check. Your county IHSS office or IHSS public authority can give you a list of nearby locations where you can be fingerprinted. Be sure to keep the Automated Transaction Identifier, ATI, number printed on the fingerprinting form, as it is needed to trace your fingerprinting. If the criminal background check finds that you have been convicted of certain crimes, you may be ineligible to become an IHSS provider. There are two categories of crimes that will make you ineligible. They are referred to as Tier 1 and Tier 2 crimes. If in the last 10 years you've been convicted of or incarcerated following the conviction of certain crimes, you are not eligible to be enrolled as an IHSS provider and receive payment from the IHSS program. On the other hand, for some Tier 2 crimes, you may be able to be an IHSS provider if you receive an individual waiver or general exception. There are two things to remember if you are working under a Tier 2 individual waiver. First, if you wish to work as an IHSS provider in a different county, you will need to submit another criminal background check to be used in the new county. Secondly, for some Tier 2 crimes, the need for an individual waiver will expire after 10 years. This means that 10 years after your last Tier 2 conviction, you may be able to work for new recipients without having them sign a waiver. Once you've completed all the enrollment conditions, you will receive the IHSS Program Notice of Provider Eligibility, confirming that you can begin working as an IHSS provider. This is a lot of information to absorb. You can find all of the requirements and the definitions of Tier 1 and Tier 2 crimes in the handouts included in your packet. There are two more important requirements that you should know and understand. Because as an IHSS provider, these laws apply directly to you. They are confidentiality and mandated reporter laws. First, confidentiality. You probably know that when you go to the doctor, your confidentiality is protected. This means that your doctors are required to keep all of your medical information private. These same rules apply to all healthcare providers and hospitals, and they also apply to you as an IHSS provider. You cannot give out any information about the services your consumer receives. You also cannot discuss any information about your consumer with any unauthorized individuals or organizations without the written permission of the consumer or the person who is legally responsible for that individual. Anyone sharing information inappropriately about someone they care for is guilty of a misdemeanor. Now, let's talk about what it means to be a mandated reporter. As an IHSS provider, you are a mandated reporter. This means by law, you must report any known or suspected abuse immediately to the County Adult Protective Services Agency, the County Children's Protective Services Agency, or local law enforcement. There are several types of abuse that must be reported, including physical abuse, mental suffering, abandonment, isolation, financial abuse, neglect, self-neglect, abduction, and sexual abuse. The information about who reported the abuse will be kept confidential. You can refer to the Mandated Reporter handout for more details and information about what you should do if you know or suspect someone you're caring for is the victim of abuse. As you know, IHSS is a huge program in California, made up of over 1 million recipients and providers. To make a program this large run as smoothly as possible, many agencies need to be involved. While it's great to have support on multiple levels, this can sometimes add to confusion as to who you should contact when different situations come up. Let's take a quick moment to break down how everything is structured and who handles what part of the process. The federal and state governments provide oversight and direction to the counties. These counties are responsible for managing the IHSS program on a local level. A county social worker will conduct an assessment. The assessment process includes identifying which services recipients require to remain safely in their own homes, how much help is needed, how much time it takes to provide the services, and how often they must be done. The social worker will take into account the different levels of need on good and bad days. The counties also enroll providers in the IHSS program, answer questions from recipients about IHSS, and participate in fraud detection activities. There are 56 IHSS public authority agencies throughout California. These agencies are responsible for maintaining the county's provider registry, making provider referrals to recipients, and offering access to provider training. Public authorities are also responsible for performing collective bargaining, as well as providing wage and health benefit information to providers. Now we're going to talk about what services IHSS does and doesn't cover. You should have a handout like this one, which says Services Covered by IHSS. In it, you will find a complete list of the services and tasks that you may be authorized to provide for your recipient employer. So let's say you're providing assistance to someone who is unable to do house cleaning or personal care. IHSS can pay for you to assist with meal preparation and cleanup, laundry, shopping, other errands, bathing and oral hygiene, feeding and dressing. Also, each service has a list of specific tasks you should be familiar with. All the approved services and tasks can be found in your handout. There are a lot of services available within the IHSS program. However, you will not have to provide all these services for the person you're caring for. only the IHSS services that are authorized for that individual. The county is required to authorize only the services the recipient needs to remain safely at home. Each recipient will receive a list showing what services you can be paid for providing and how much time is authorized to do them each month. The list is called a Notice of Action. Before providing services to an IHSS recipient, you should ask the recipient to tell you which IHSS tasks have been authorized, the number of hours, and the schedule you are being hired to work. All providers will receive a notice that contains a list of approved services for their recipient. Remember, IHSS will only pay you for a service or task that has been authorized. However, the recipient you work for may choose to pay you to provide services that the IHSS program does not pay for. This agreement would be between you and your recipient. If your recipient asks you to do something that is not on the list of services or tasks, or asks you to do something that has not been authorized for them, you will not be paid by IHSS for doing what they ask. In these situations, it's generally best to politely remind them about the Notice of Action list and services authorized. If you do choose to do something that is not on the Notice of Action, you cannot put the time it takes on your timesheet. Some of the things IHSS will not pay for include moving furniture, paying bills, reading mail to your recipient, caring for pets, including service animals, gardening, sitting with them to visit or watch TV, taking the recipient on social outings, reimbursement for gas or transportation expense, repair services. You may also find there will be times when previously authorized services are not covered. For example, you will not be paid for providing any services if your recipient is in a licensed care facility. Generally speaking, the same also applies to cleaning your recipient's home if they go into a licensed institution. However, there are a few exceptions to this rule. If you find yourself in this situation, be sure to ask your employer recipient to verify with their county social worker first before you do anything. If your employer is hospitalized or passes away, you cannot claim hours and/or be paid during their hospitalization or after their death, and should notify the county social worker immediately. If you claim for time worked on your timesheet for services in either of these situations, you will have to repay any money that you received and/or may face criminal penalties. In addition to the authorized services and tasks for your recipient, there is also a set amount of hours approved for each service per month. You will not be paid for any time above those monthly hours that have been authorized. If it consistently takes more or less time to complete the authorized tasks, you should have your employer report these changes to their county social worker. The county social worker is required to reassess the recipient whenever there is a change in circumstances affecting their need for services. If your employer refuses services you have been authorized to do, you need to make sure your timesheets do not include hours for these services. You must also keep in mind that the recipient may have multiple providers and may choose which providers assist them with certain tasks. As you can tell, it's important that your timesheet only reflects the time you have spent doing authorized services and tasks. It is never okay to put time on your timesheet for hours you have not worked. Deliberately filling out your timesheet with incorrect information is a serious issue and can carry some serious consequences. including being considered as criminal fraud. We will talk more about fraud later in the video. Now let's discuss the Workweek program requirements that may affect you as an IHSS provider. Let's begin exploring these requirements by reviewing some key terms. Monthly authorized hours. The total number of IHSS hours a recipient is authorized per month. The number of authorized hours for each recipient is determined by your recipient's social worker at each assessment. Next, the IHSS Workweek, which begins at 12 a.m. on Sunday and ends at 11:59 p.m. the following Saturday. It is essential to be aware of the Workweek when planning your hours with your recipients. Lastly, maximum weekly hours are the number of service hours that a provider is allowed to work per work week. Now that we've reviewed these important terms, let's talk about how you will use them. A provider's maximum weekly hours are calculated by dividing a recipient's monthly authorized hours by 4. These maximum weekly hours then limit how many hours may be worked from Sunday through Saturday. Any of those hours past 40 are considered overtime and are compensated at the overtime rate. For example, let's say your recipient has 200 authorized monthly hours. Dividing this by 4 equals 50, which means you will have 50 maximum weekly hours, allowing you to work up to 50 hours a week. Remember, since most months are slightly longer than 4 weeks, the maximum weekly hours won't always equal the actual hours worked in a week. This means you'll have to plan with your recipient to ensure there are enough hours to cover their authorized services until the end of the month, especially in those months with 30 and 31 days. Depending upon the number of recipients you serve, your weekly maximum hours will be figured out in one of 2 ways. If you work for only one recipient, the maximum weekly hours will be the recipient's monthly authorized hours divided by 4. This means that since a recipient cannot receive more than 283 hours a month, you will never be able to work more than 70 hours and 45 minutes a week. If you work for more than one recipient, you cannot work more than a combined total of 66 hours per work week. You will be informed of your recipient's maximum weekly hours and the services you may provide via the IHSS Program Provider Notice of Recipient Authorized Hours and Services, Form SOC 2271. Anytime there's a change in your recipient's authorized services, you will receive an updated SOC 2271. Please remember to discuss the SOC 2271 when received so that everyone is on the same page. Please be aware that if your recipient has multiple providers, then the hours on the SOC 2271 may not all be available to you. In this situation, communication becomes even more important between you and your recipient in order to avoid disagreement in the number of hours worked. If there's conflict over hours, it may be necessary for your recipient to officially assign hours with Form SOC 838. Now let's define 2 more terms before moving on. As a provider, you are eligible to receive overtime pay. Overtime is any amount of hours in a work week over 40 hours. Overtime is paid at a rate of 1.5 times regular pay. So for example, working 2 overtime hours means you'll be paid as if you worked 3 regular hours. However, there is a limit on how much overtime you will be paid. We'll discuss these limitations later in this video. It's important that you follow all of the overtime and travel time limitations to avoid receiving a violation. If a violation is received and you don't understand why, contact your local county IHSS office to get additional information. Now that we have discussed the work week requirements and have reviewed the key terms, let's talk about timesheets. In order to get paid, you're going to need to know how to properly fill out a timesheet because errors could mean a delay in getting paid. While timesheets do not have a due date, the sooner a timesheet is submitted, the sooner you will get paid. Let's have a look at a sample timesheet. Notice first that the form is arranged in 4 workweek blocks with the date next to the day of the week. Using only a black ballpoint pen, enter the number of hours and minutes worked each day in the spaces provided on the timesheet. If the number being entered is 10 or higher, be sure to enter only 1 digit per box. For example, if you worked 10 hours on the first, enter the 1 in the first box and the 0 in the second. Be sure that all entries remain inside the boxes. Add up the total number of hours and minutes worked per week and enter this number at the bottom of each work week under the total section. Oftentimes, a pay period does not begin on a Sunday, which means that work weeks may often overlap pay periods. This may make it difficult to keep track of maximum weekly hours in some weeks. Because of this, hours claimed from the previous pay period will be printed in the appropriate boxes. Looking back to an example timesheet, you can see that on Sunday, February 28th, the first day of the work week, shows the number of hours claimed. Even though these hours have already been paid and won't be paid again, it's important to count them in the work week total at the bottom. This will help both you and the IHSS payroll system ensure that you have not exceeded your maximum weekly hours. Once the hours are entered, both you and your recipient must sign and date the back of the timesheet. The timesheet cannot be signed, dated, or submitted before you have finished working for the pay period. We recommend waiting until the end of the pay period to submit your timesheet. The last step is to mail the timesheet back in the envelope provided. Instructions are printed on the timesheet, but here's some additional important tips to remember when filling out your timesheet. If you move, you must notify your local IHSS office or public authority to request an address change form within 10 days of moving. As we've mentioned earlier, you may only enter time spent doing authorized services. You won't be paid by the IHSS program for doing things that aren't approved. You can only enter time you yourself worked. You cannot claim work done by someone else. Only use a standard ballpoint pen with black ink when filling out your timesheet. Do not use pencil, felt tip marker, or ink color other than black, and refrain from using correction tape or fluid to fix an entry. If you make a mistake, contact your local county IHSS office to obtain a new timesheet. Once your timesheet is complete, make a copy of it and mail the original to the address given to you by the county in the envelope provided. Do not fold or tear the timesheet. Instead, carefully cut the timesheet along the dotted line. Place it into the envelope, add a stamp, and mail. Only 1 timesheet should be mailed per envelope. You should receive your paycheck within 10 working days from the day the timesheet processing facility receives your timesheet. If you have any questions or problems with your timesheet, contact your local county IHSS office. If you work for more than one recipient on the same day at different locations, you may be eligible to claim travel time. Eligible providers may claim up to 7 hours of travel time per work week. If you claim more than 7 hours in a work week, You will be paid that travel time up to 14 hours, but will incur a violation. Your time spent traveling between recipients' locations does not count toward your maximum weekly hours and is not deducted from your recipient's monthly authorized hours. Travel time does not include the time it takes for you to travel from your own home to the location where you provide services for a recipient or back home after your work is completed. Travel claim forms will be mailed out with your timesheets. While timesheets and travel claim forms come in the same envelope, they are meant to be mailed to separate addresses. Pay close attention to your return addresses to ensure that you will mail the two forms to the correct places. While you may mail the two forms together, be aware that it will delay the processing of your payment. In addition to travel time, you may be compensated for wait time. Wait time is part of the medical accompaniment service and refers to the time spent waiting to assist your recipient at a medical appointment. Please see your handout materials and/or contact your local county IHSS office for more information on wait time. On occasion, it may be necessary for your recipient to authorize you to work more than their maximum weekly hours, as identified on the Recipient Notice of Maximum Weekly Hours Form, SOC 2271A. You and your recipient will need county approval to authorize this adjustment if it requires you to work more overtime hours in your work week. Let's say, for example, you normally work 35 hours a week, but your recipient needs you to work an extra 10 hours on Friday and Saturday. Since these 10 hours will give you 5 more overtime hours than usual, you would need county approval. If a workweek adjustment doesn't add overtime hours to your schedule, then you won't need county approval. It is, however, important to let any other providers or recipients associated with you or your recipient know about the adjustment to avoid possible conflict. It is possible that your recipient may need to find another provider to fulfill the services needed in the adjustment. It's always recommended that recipients have at least one backup provider in case you are unavailable. It's a good idea to check with your recipient's social worker when adjusting hours. Contact your local county IHSS office for more information on how to make these changes. Many of the rules we've explored today are intended to ensure that the program's limited resources are available to everyone who needs them. One of the ways that the State of California Department of Social Services, or CDSS, has developed to ensure these regulations is the violation process. A violation is a formal action taken by CDSS when certain program rules are broken. Some of the things that will cause you to get a violation are working more than 40 hours in a work week when your maximum weekly hours are 40 hours or less, and therefore you have no approved overtime. Working more hours for your recipient than the recipient's maximum weekly hours, which caused you to work more overtime hours in a month than you normally would without receiving county approval. Working more than a total of 66 hours in a work week when you work for more than one recipient, or claiming more than 7 hours of travel time in a work week. If you do any of the above things, you will still be paid, but will also get a violation. Consequences for violations depend on how many violations you have already built up. For the first violation, you and each of your recipients will get a notice of the violation, but incur no other consequences. After receiving your first violation, we recommend contacting your county to discuss how to avoid further violations. If you incur a second violation, you will have the opportunity to complete a self-guided training to learn about violation rules. The training is completely voluntary, but if you complete it within 14 days of your violation, then the violation will be erased. Because of this, we strongly recommend completing the self-guided training. An important thing to note is that you will only have the opportunity to complete this training once. After your second violation is removed, all future second violations will remain. This is also the last violation, which will not directly affect your ability to work as a provider. If a third violation occurs, you will be suspended as an IHSS provider for 90 days. If a fourth violation occurs, you will be ineligible to work as an IHSS provider for 365 days. If you become ineligible due to a fourth violation, you will have to re-enroll after your ineligibility period in order to resume working as an IHSS provider. The good news is that you will never receive more than one violation per month, regardless of how many things you do that can cause a violation. You will always have the opportunity to question a violation through the county dispute process. You have 10 calendar days from the date of the violation to request a county review by submitting the Notice to Provider of Right to Dispute Violation for Exceeding Workweek and/or Travel Time Limits, Form SOC 2272. If you submit an SOC 2272, the county will complete its review within 10 business days. The third and fourth violations have an additional level of review available, known as the State Administrative Review. If you initiate the county dispute process and disagree with the results, you will be able to request a State Administrative Review to review your violation. This will be your final chance to overturn the violation. If you are not successful in overturning a violation, don't worry, because it may not remain forever. Once you go 1 year without receiving another violation, the number of violations you've received will be reduced by 1 each year. Let's recap. To prevent a violation, you should avoid working more than 40 hours in a work week without your recipient getting approval from the county when your recipient is authorized less than 40 hours in a work week. Working more hours for your recipient than the recipient's maximum weekly hours, which causes you to work more overtime hours in a month than you normally would without receiving county approval. Working more than 66 hours in a work week when working for more than one recipient. Claiming more than 7 hours of travel time in a work week. For more information regarding violations, contact your local county IHSS office or IHSS Public Authority. As we said earlier, IHSS is a Medi-Cal program funded by federal, state, and county dollars. This means that IHSS fraud is Medi-Cal fraud. The California Department of Healthcare Services is responsible for investigating Medi-Cal fraud. Reducing and eliminating fraud helps save IHSS program resources. If you suspect anyone may be committing IHSS or other Medi-Cal fraud, you must report this to Medi-Cal by calling the toll-free number, sending an email, filling out an online form, or contacting the county. You do not have to have proof of fraud. There are investigators who will determine whether Medi-Cal fraud has been committed. The Department of Healthcare Service Auditors, County District Attorney's Office, and state and county welfare investigators all investigate potential fraud when cases are referred to them and prosecute those accused of fraud. In addition to public reporting, fraud may be detected in several ways, including through computer matches with other federal and state agencies. During the assessment process, while the county and/or state staff conduct quality assurance and fraud detection activities, and during authorized, unannounced program integrity visits to the homes of recipients by state and/or county staff. The following video shows some real examples of how actual IHSS recipients and providers tried to take inappropriate advantage of the IHSS program. The result? Criminal fraud and some pretty significant penalties. While the stories are true, actors have been used to portray both the recipients and the providers.
In-home supportive services provide help for those in need. It's important to preserve the program resources and avoid fraud. We know these examples represent the minority, but it is important for you to understand what is considered fraud. Understanding the rules can help you avoid a situation that can have significant consequences. Let's look at a few examples. This is Shirley Sayer. She thought she could be in two places at one time. She was an IHSS provider for her son in California and moved from California to Colorado and still claimed IHSS benefits. That is illegal. Shirley requested that her checks be mailed to a post office box in Riverdale, California, and then forwarded to her address in Colorado. She submitted timesheets claiming she provided IHSS services for her son in California for 5 months. Shirley is now serving 180 days in jail with 3 years probation. Here are the Shibosians. Charlie was the provider for his father Earl, who said he had functional limitations, but was caught on tape showing this was not true. Because Earl was not disabled, the timesheets submitted by Charlie were fraudulent. Viola was the IHSS provider for her mother Gracie, who was also caught on tape showing that she overstated her condition. As a result of mom and dad overstating their needs, their children received over $70,000 in false benefits. They are all serving time now. Malay was the provider caring for her sick father Vaughn, who was hospitalized and died in March of 2005. Malay submitted timesheets for the care of her father while he was in the hospital and for 2 months after his death. Malay is serving 120 days in jail with 1 year probation for timesheet fraud. For 3 years and 8 months, David was a provider and Joe was a recipient. David didn't actually perform any services for Joe because Joe didn't actually have anything wrong with him. When the checks came in, they split the money. Joe and David are serving 90 days in jail with 3 years probation for IHSS fraud. The in-home supportive services system can be abused in many ways, and the consequences for intentionally abusing the system are devastating to you and your family. If you have a question or are unsure of IHSS policies and procedures, ask for help. If you assume and you are incorrect, you could be liable for your mistake. The District Attorney's Office takes all fraud cases seriously.
The information shown here is also included in your packet. Remember, by being aware of both the IHSS program rules and your own responsibilities as an IHSS provider, you can help protect the integrity of the IHSS program. Well, we're just about done, but there's just one last thing that you will need to do before you leave here today, and that is to sign the Provider Enrollment Agreement form that's included in your packet. We hope that this presentation has given you a better understanding of the IHSS program and provided some helpful information on how to follow the requirements. If you have any questions, your county social services staff or public authority representative can help you. On behalf of the California Department of Social Services, we would like to thank you for your willingness to serve as an IHSS provider. Your job is definitely not an easy one, but thanks to you, it can help keep elderly, blind, and disabled adults and children safely in their own homes. We thank you for your assistance and dedication to this valuable program.